تعتبر مملكة البحرين إحدى المناطق الغنية بالخيول العربية الأصيلة، حيث ارتبط اسم الخيل العربية الأصيلة بهذه المنطقة منذ القدم، فحظيت بالعناية الفائقة التي تستحقها، وسميت خيل البحرين بخيل الجوع تشبيها لها باللؤلؤة التي هي من قاع البحر. كما تتميز سلالات الخيل البحرينية بجذورها الضاربة في عمق التاريخ، ويكاد بعض أنواعها تتفرد به مملكة البحرين فقط، وتعتبر الجياد العربية الأصيلة رمزاً للقوة والمنعة في التاريخ البحريني. حب الخيل والشغف بها الذي ولد في نفسي منذ الصغر جعل الاهتمام والبحث في تاريخها أمر يتملك وجداني، فالخيل وكل ما يخصها من معلومات أو صور تقع في يدي أهتم بمشاركتكم بها، لأن رسالتي الإعلامية تحتم علي إطلاعكم على كل صغيرة وكبيرة في هذا المجال الهام، خصوصاً وأن الخيل رمز للنبل والأصالة والعزة والمنزلة الرفيعة، فقد ألهمت الناس منذ القدم وتملكت قلوبهم ليتأملوا سحرها وجمال خلقها.
The horses of the Royal Stud of Bahrain became a life passion with me when I first came to Bahrain in 1967, and I'd always had horses, I'd always been around horses, but I'd never seen Arabian horses. And then I was shown the Bahraini Arabian horse, and it was like no horse that I'd ever seen in my life before. The conformation, the temperament, even the colour on the coat was really, really very special. So I wanted to know more about it, and I had three very, very good tutors in that I could ask His Royal Highness the Emir, Hassan bin Salah, and probably the wisest of them all, which was a gentleman called Fatis, who by then was quite old, so he could take me back right to the beginning of the century, his century, which probably took in the early 1900s, and just go round and say to me, well, this mare was, you know, the favourite mare of such and such a sheikh, and this one had actually been to war, the grandmother had been ridden in wars. So for a Westerner like me, it was absolutely enthralling, and it was a magic carpet ride. So I asked question after question, and every time they answered, I found another question. And the first question, of course, was where did these horses come from? And I learnt that they had travelled up in the 1600s when the Al Khalifa had migrated north as part of a tribe and taken the horses with them from the Nejd. So all the horses on Bahrain today, well, the majority of them in the Royal Stud, were from Saudi Arabia, where their family came from originally. And of course the ideal place to bring them is an island like Bahrain, because once on that island they are a nucleus, a closed stud that, you know, can't be really, well, I don't think contaminated is the word, but, you know, if you want to keep something pure, put it on an island and then breed very carefully, and, you know, you will end up with exactly what you do want to preserve. So the family bought the horses from Saudi Arabia. They brought them over to Bahrain when Ahmed, the conqueror, took Bahrain, and the family and the horses moved in, and that's where they've been preserved to this date from 1783 right through to today. And the tradition is absolutely wonderful. They pass from father to son. So the emir will hand the horses down to his son and so on through the centuries. So they all get bred in the same traditional way. Obviously, each sheikh will sometimes have a favourite stallion. So, you know, for a while it was Shawaf, Wadna, and then more recently Jalabi. And now we have a new keeper of the royal horses in His Royal Highness Sheikh Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa, and he is a very hands-on breeder in that he knows exactly what's going on, and he makes sure that, you know, he's there on the spot. So the traditions have continued since 1783 right through to this day. Part of the breeding program and the preservation program is that within the Arabian horse world, you know, there are families, and on Bahrain we have 20 pure families that have been preserved by the ruling family, and it's the only collection of horses in the world that have got 20 families preserved. So it's fascinating to see. There are Hamdaniya, there's Saklawi, Jalabi, all the wonderful old names that have survived through the centuries by being preserved by the royal family.
سلالات الخيل البحرينية الأصيلة والمسجلة في منظمة الواهو عرفت عالمياً بأنها من أنقى السلالات التي لا زالت تحتفظ بعراقتها وهويتها المعروفة، ليس في مملكة البحرين فحسب، وإنما حتى الموجود منها خارج مملكة البحرين. كما تعتبر الجياد البحرينية واحدة من أفضل الجياد العربية، حيث تتميز بالجمال والأناقة إلى جانب الصبر والدقة والسرعة وحضورها القوي في سباقات التحمل. في هذه الحلقة نستعرض ونكتشف المزيد من سلالات الخيل البحرينية الموجودة خارج مملكة البحرين، ما جعلني أستقل الطائرة مع فريق عمل نشط من تلفزيون البحرين في زيارة ثانية للمملكة المتحدة بريطانيا من أجل البحث والتقصي وتصوير كل ما نجده أمامنا من هذه الخيل الأصيلة، بهدف توثيق وتأريخ تواجد السلالات البحرينية الهامة خارج المملكة.
When I first came to Bahrain, the horses were under the care of exactly the same name, His Highness Sheikh Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa. But we are still at that stage keeping them in the traditional old way, in that it was quite startling for me as a Westerner to come and see horses kept on what they call a sengal. It's like a small chain to the foreleg, and you could come into the stable yard and there'd be 15-20 stallions standing within biting and kicking distance of each other on these little chains, but nobody ever fought. The temperament that was bred into these Bahraini horses is so good that stallions will stand, you know, shoulder to shoulder, and you never have a problem with them. The idea, when I asked about the the chain and the sengal, I said, you know, to a Western eye this looks a little bit, almost like a little bit cruel, and they said, look, we live in the desert and we need every bit of breeze on our horses, so why would we put them in a box like you do in Europe? Because if we put our horses in a stable, in a box like you do, we would cook them, you know, they would be so. So as this was explained to me, I could see, you know, the reasoning behind the old way, which was to keep them out under a big shade and have as much breeze as possible because they were not boxed in. So that made a lot of sense to me. But now we've moved on, and His Majesty King Hamad, the son of Sheikh Isa bin Salman, now has a slightly different arrangement. And of course, we now have the luxury of we can air condition the horses. You know, if it's too hot, terribly hot, there are fans, there's air conditioning. So like a lot of Bahrain, the royal stables have developed in the modern ilk. So we now, as I say, we have a different way of keeping them. So now we do keep them more stabled, but again, in open, you know, the walls are all mesh and open, so we can still get the breeze, we can still get, you know, the horses kept cool. It was just interesting to see how it developed.
My father came home from his work in the Royal Navy one day when I was 13 and told me that he was going to be posted to Bahrain. And I was very excited because I knew you had Arab horses and I was crazy about horses, so I was so looking forward to seeing your horses. When we went out to Bahrain initially, I joined the saddle club at Jufair, which was run by the Navy, and they had 2 horses there that I used to ride. I then got very friendly with the base doctor who used to ride for the Sheikh Isa, who was the ruler at the time, and he introduced me and sought permission from Sheikh Isa to see if I could ride his horses and race them. And that's how my experiences started with riding and racing beautiful Bahraini horses. I started off riding a lovely chestnut mare called Managia. We used to ride every day and then race on a Friday, and that was all very exciting. In those days, we started off with a falcon display. So the bearers would bring the falcons with their beautiful headdresses and plumage, and then they would be set off for some pigeons, so all the audience would look at that. And then after that we had all the camel racing. Then of course the highlight of the day was the horses. There was usually about 5 or 6 races and maybe about 5 or 6 or 7 people in each race, and I was one of the very privileged few Europeans who was allowed to ride the horses, and they were absolutely fabulous. I had the most wonderful time. I rode for 3 years, and I can only say it's probably one of the best times of my life. The horses, they are beautiful, they are strong but delicate, but they have the most marvellous temperaments, and they seem to be able to be equipped for any job you ask them to do because you have that temperament. And I think that that's the key to the Bahraini horse, that they are very different from some of the other Arab horses that English people know of, because they have that steady temperament, and because of that you can do so much more with them. When I was in Bahrain, I met Jenny Lees, and but we didn't know each other very well, but we just knew each other. When we both came back from Bahrain, we went to different parts of England, so we didn't see each other. And it wasn't until probably 13 or 14 years ago, just by chance, one of her horses was at the same stables as my horse, and I recognised the Bahraini flag on her lorry, and I made inquiries, and then we got in touch again and we became firm friends. And then since I knew Jenny, she then gave me a Bahraini horse, Najma, from a foal, and I've had Najma for all her life. So she is wonderful. She came back to Jenny's 2 years ago to have a foal, but unfortunately that didn't work. So she's now out on loan with a friend and is very happy.
خلال رحلتنا إلى بريطانيا تنقلنا بين العديد من الإسطبلات في مختلف المناطق، والتي تضم خيولا من السلالات البحرينية، حيث تم الالتقاء بأصحاب الإسطبلات والمهتمين ومربي الخيل الذين أشادوا بالخيل البحرينية كونها تعد من الأصايل العربية العريقة والهامة في مجالات الخيل العالمية. وبدأت رحلتنا بزيارة إلى قلعة وقصر وينزور في المقاطعة الإنجليزية بيركشاير بالمملكة المتحدة. أمام حشد مكون من حوالي 5500 شخص، شارك خيالة من مختلف دول العالم ومن ضمنها مملكة البحرين، حيث تم استعراض 900 جواد و1500 فارس من المملكة المتحدة والدول المشاركة في هذا المهرجان، والذين قدموا استعراضات مدعمة باستخدامات الليزر والمؤثرات الصوتية والإضاءة، بالإضافة إلى الموسيقى المصاحبة لهذه الاستعراضات. وأدى الخيالة والفرسان فقرات راقصة بديعة، معيدين للأذهان الأحداث الهامة في حياة الملكة، مثل تتويجها في عام 1953. وتأتي مشاركة الخيل بهذا العدد الكبير تأكيداً على حب الملكة للخيل والتقدير الكبير لهذا العنصر المميز في تاريخ المملكة المتحدة.